Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We are delighted to share with you different stories about love and betrayal from around the world. So let's begin our journey today. In a Victorian-style villa in West London, the atmosphere at the dining table had frozen like oil paint on a canvas. Imogen raised her glass, the crystal sparkling coldly under the chandelier's light. She looked around, scanning the expectant faces of family and friends, finally resting on her husband Giles, whose indifferent eyes resembled two gray pebbles. "Marrying a waste of space like you has been the biggest mistake of my life," Imogen announced loudly at the family gathering. "I think about divorce every day." Her family members looked mockingly at Giles. Giles simply smiled and nodded, then said, "What a coincidence." His calm response created a silence around the table. Imogen frowned in confusion, clearly expecting another feeble defense or plea. But tonight's Giles was different, his eyes shining with a resolve Imogen had never seen before. The next day, when the court summons arrived at her office, she understood what he meant. 6 months earlier, Giles had retired from a renowned accounting firm in central London. 35 years of career had earned him a considerable pension and an extraordinary sensitivity to numbers. He had planned his future, enjoying a peaceful retirement with Imogen, his wife of 30 years, perhaps buying a small villa on Portugal's Algarve coast and spending the rest of their days there. Giles wasn't a workaholic. In the later stage of his career, he strictly observed leaving the office before 6 o'clock, attended all the important social events organized by Imogen, and had even learned to appreciate the avant-garde art exhibitions she held at the Tate Modern. But he was indeed a reserved person, more inclined to listen than to speak eloquently, a trait that seemed out of place in Imogen's dazzling social circle. "I don't understand why you always stand in the corner, Giles," Imogen had complained after a gallery opening. "The Harringtons were asking for your opinion on their new collection, and you just nodded and smiled." "I just thought the painting was overpriced," Giles replied calmly. £40,000 is excessive for an emerging artist's work." Imogen rolled her eyes. "That's your problem. Art isn't a numbers game. It's a symbol of feeling and status." Imogen ran a highly regarded modern art gallery in Chelsea. She possessed a keen eye for art and an enviable social network, making her gallery an unavoidable presence in London's art scene. As a young woman, Imogen had been an aspiring painter, until reality made her recognize that her talent in front of the canvas was far inferior to her business acumen behind it. With age, her desire for social status grew increasingly. She dreamed of entering the coarse circles of London high society, while Giles' quiet personality and restraint towards luxury became obstacles in her view. She began to belittle her husband in subtle ways, first privately, then in front of friends, and finally at family gatherings. "Giles, could you stop staring at the account books? The Thorntons have invited us to their yacht party," Imogen complained one Saturday morning. Giles looked up, shifting his gaze from his laptop. "I'm just checking our investment portfolio, dear. There have been some fluctuations this quarter. Always numbers, numbers, numbers." "You're retired, Giles. Life isn't just spreadsheets and percentages," Imogen sighed. "The Thorntons know many gallery directors. It's important for my career." Giles closed his laptop. "All right, I'll go change," he responded calmly, hiding the hurt in his eyes as he walked toward the bedroom. This was the pattern of their marriage. Imogen made demands. Giles complied. Over the years, this dynamic gradually eroded the equality and respect between them. When Rupert entered Imogen's life, it was like a breath of fresh air into her suffocating daily routine. This 49-year-old art broker possessed everything Giles lacked: charming appearance, superior social skills, and passionate insights about art. They met at a private exhibition, and when Rupert elegantly kissed the back of her hand and commented on her stunning artistic taste, Imogen felt a thrill she had forgotten for years. "You know, Bellingham's work hides a surprisingly deep meaning beneath the surface," Rupert whispered to Imogen in a corner of the gallery, his warm breath brushing past her ear. "Like some people, don't you think?" Imogen felt her cheeks flush. "Are you always this good at interpreting artwork, Rupert?" "No," his gaze directly met her eyes. "Only when the artwork, or its guardian, truly moves me." After that, their meetings became frequent. It started with business meetings at the gallery, then private lunches, and finally evolved into secret rendezvous in a hotel room in Notting Hill. Imogen told herself this wasn't merely an affair, but reclaiming her vitality as a woman, recovering the passion that had been worn away by Giles' silence and monotony. "My husband never understands me," Imogen confided to Rupert during a pillow talk after one of their encounters. "For 30 years, I've always been the one giving more, while he offers me nothing but his numbers and silent criticism." Rupert gently caressed her cheek. "You deserve to be understood, appreciated, dear Imogen. For a vibrant, artistic woman like you to be trapped in such a dull marriage is practically a crime against art." Imogen melted into these sweet words, never realizing that Rupert used the same charm offensive on every potential business partner. Rupert showed her a world full of excitement and possibilities. He proposed a plan, using his client network and her gallery's reputation to inflate the prices of emerging artists' works through a series of carefully orchestrated transactions, gaining substantial profits. "Imagine, darling," Rupert described during a private dinner. "In 6 months, we could accumulate enough funds to buy a villa in Marbella. You could open a new gallery, free from London's constraints." Imogen was captivated by this prospect. "But is it legal?" she asked half-heartedly, her heart already fascinated by this dream. Rupert flashed a charming smile. "The art market has its own rules, dear. We just understand better than others how to operate these rules. It's not fraud, but strategic optimization of art investment." She had never participated in any illegal activities, but Rupert made it sound like regular operations in the art world, a gray area business wisdom. She gradually became involved, starting to organize exclusive exhibitions for Rupert's clients, who coincidentally showed unusual interest in price-inflated works by emerging artists. "We need a systematic approach," Rupert explained in their secret meeting. "First step, your gallery hosts an exclusive exhibition for this artist. Second step, my clients purchase several works at slightly above market price. Third step, auction house friends help us arrange for 1 or 2 pieces to be sold at higher prices. Once a price record is established, other collectors will follow, afraid of missing the next master." Imogen marveled at the ingenuity of the plan. "What about tax issues?" "Leave that to me, dear. I have several offshore accounts, completely legal, just tax efficient," Rupert replied dismissively, his fingers lightly tracing along her arm. Meanwhile, Giles noticed the changes in his wife. She came home increasingly late, lost interest in family gatherings, and even changed her dressing style. But when he tried to inquire, he always received evasive answers. "I'm just preparing an important exhibition, Giles. Not everyone has the luxury of retirement life," she responded coldly, implying criticism of his comfortable lifestyle. One Friday night, as Giles was preparing dinner in the kitchen, Imogen's phone rang. She hurried out of the room to answer it, but forgot to take her phone. The screen flashed with a message preview. "Tonight at 8, usual place. Missing your lips." Giles stared at the message, feeling a knot in his stomach. He could have picked up the phone to check more, but a certain dignity prevented him. When Imogen returned to the kitchen, he simply continued chopping vegetables as if nothing had happened. "Who was that?" he asked calmly. "Oh, just gallery business," Imogen replied casually, picking up her phone and quickly browsing through it. "I might be late tonight. An important client wants to discuss a large-scale piece." Giles nodded, not exposing her lie. Instead, he began to pay more attention. Giles chose silence, but beneath his silence lay keen observation. As an experienced accountant, his trained eyes began to notice unusual patterns. There were unexplainable fund movements in Imogen's gallery accounts. Her schedule became chaotic and filled with contradictions. Most importantly, there was a folder in the home safe that he had never seen before. On a night when Imogen claimed to be attending an important client dinner, Giles opened that folder. Inside was a series of contracts and printed emails detailing the arrangements between Imogen and Rupert, not just their intimate relationship, but evidence of how they manipulated the art market. One email was particularly striking, where Rupert wrote, "Dear Imogen, the tax office will never discover our little trick. In a few months, we can start our new life." At that moment, 30 years of marriage collapsed before Giles' eyes. But rather than being overwhelmed by anger or sadness, he felt a strange calmness. His years of experience as an accountant dealing with complex problems allowed him to think clearly. He did the only thing that made logical sense. He began collecting evidence. In the following weeks, Giles became a discreet detective. He used all the time when Imogen was out to gather information, photocopy documents, record abnormal transactions. He discovered a shocking fact. Imogen and Rupert were not only lovers, but had jointly operated a rather complex art valuation fraud scheme, potentially involving millions of pounds in tax fraud. Giles hired a private investigator to track Imogen and Rupert's activities. This former police officer named Malcolm brought more evidence. Photos showing the two entering and exiting high-end hotels, secret meeting recordings revealing their collusion with auction house insiders, even evidence suggesting they planned to relocate to Spain together. Is all of this legally obtained? Giles confirmed, looking through the folder Malcolm handed him. Absolutely legal, sir, Malcolm answered. All recordings were made in public places, and photos were taken in open settings. We didn't use any listening devices or illegal methods. Giles nodded, closing the folder with satisfaction. Good. Please continue. I need conclusive evidence. He engaged a legal advisor specialized in art fraud, Fiona. She was an efficient woman who had defeated several major galleries in litigation cases. I must warn you, Giles, this will be ugly, Fiona said in their first meeting. Not just the marriage breakdown, but potential criminal charges. Once we start, there's no going back. Giles' eyes were resolute. I understand, but I cannot continue living in a lie. Then, we need a comprehensive plan, Fiona said seriously. Not just divorce strategy, but also how to report the fraud to authorities and protect yourself from being implicated. Giles established a separate bank account, transferring his assets to a secure location. He contacted a real estate agent in Portugal, beginning preparations for his new life. Most importantly, he maintained a perfect facade, continuing to play the role of the compliant husband, while deep inside, a meticulous plan was taking shape. 6 months passed, and Imogen became increasingly bold. Her humiliations escalated from private complaints to public mockery. At that fateful family gathering, when she announced the marriage's failure and her consideration of divorce, she expected Giles' usual retreat and compromise. She never thought he would say, "What a coincidence," let alone receive divorce papers the next day. When her trembling hands opened the thick legal document, the color drained from her face. The summons not only contained the divorce application but detailed evidence files revealing her inappropriate relationship with Rupert and their suspected art price manipulation and tax fraud. More shocking was that copies of these documents had already been sent to the tax office, the Financial Conduct Authority, and her gallery's major investors. Imogen immediately called Rupert, her voice shaking with fear. He knows. He knows everything. Calm down, dear," Rupert tried to reassure her, but she could hear the tension in his voice. He's probably just bluffing. What could that boring accountant discover? You don't understand, Rupert, Imogen said in a low voice. He has evidence. Detailed evidence. Emails, contracts, bank transfer records, even our photos at the Claridge Hotel. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Photos? What photos? You know, those photos? Imogen bit her lip. And the recordings of our meeting with Harrison from Sotheby's. Damn it, Rupert cursed. How could he possibly? No, this isn't possible. He must have hired someone. The point isn't how he got the evidence, Rupert. Imogen nearly screamed. The point is he has reported us to the tax office and financial regulators. We're finished. Rupert tried to calm her. Relax, dear. He's just bluffing. He has no substantial evidence. But he was wrong. Giles indeed possessed conclusive evidence. As a former accountant skilled in numbers, he had tracked every suspicious transaction, recorded every secret meeting, captured every email that revealed the truth. The storm was about to break, and Imogen and Rupert were completely unprepared. A week after the divorce papers were served, the pressure facing Imogen nearly caused her to collapse. The gallery's major investors demanded an urgent meeting. The tax office had begun investigating her financial dealings, and several important artists threatened to withdraw their works. Worse, Rupert seemed to be distancing himself, his calls becoming less frequent, always making excuses about being too busy to meet. I need you to come over now, Rupert, Imogen insisted during a rare call. The investors are coming tomorrow, and I don't know how to explain all this. Darling, I'm in a bit of difficulty myself. Rupert's voice revealed impatience. I also have tax investigators watching me. We need to keep our distance, at least for now. Keep distance. Imogen repeated incredulously. After I took such risks for you, we agreed to face everything together. Don't be so dramatic, Imogen. It's just temporary strategy. When things blow over, we'll start again. After hanging up, Imogen felt more alone and afraid than ever. She looked around her luxurious apartment, suddenly realizing that she might soon lose everything. Her phone rang again. It was a call from the law firm. Mrs. Imogen, the lawyer's serious voice came through. We need to meet as soon as possible. Mr. Giles' lawyer has submitted an initial property division proposal, and it's quite unfavorable to you. Given the conclusive evidence, they have a considerable advantage. What does he want? Imogen asked weakly. Simply put, almost everything. The London property, most joint investments, even requesting you pay his legal fees. Considering the British law's attitude towards infidelity and financial misconduct, the court is likely to support most of his demands. Imogen gripped the phone, her knuckles white. There must be something we can do. Unless you can provide some evidence in your favor or are willing to cooperate with authorities, revealing bigger issues, the lawyer cautiously suggested. Imogen's thoughts immediately turned to Rupert. If she had to sacrifice something to protect herself, it wouldn't be her lifestyle. Meanwhile, Giles was sitting in Fiona's office, listening to the latest developments. The tax office is very interested in the evidence, Fiona said. They've already begun a full investigation into Rupert and his client network. The Financial Conduct Authority has also joined the investigation, focusing on market manipulation. Giles nodded, his expression calm. And the divorce proceedings? Progressing well. Given the nature of the evidence, we're at a clear advantage. Imogen's lawyer has already hinted she might be willing to accept a quick settlement. I don't want a settlement, Giles said firmly. I want a full court hearing. Let everything be public. Fiona appeared slightly surprised. It will be painful, Giles. The media will cover the case. All details will be publicly discussed. That's exactly what I want. Giles' eyes flashed with calm determination. 30 years of marriage, ending in deception and humiliation. I won't let her off easily. The divorce proceedings lasted 3 months, longer than expected. Imogen tried to counterattack, claiming Giles was an emotionally distant workaholic who had neglected her needs for years. But these accusations seemed feeble in the face of abundant evidence. In the recordings played in court, her own complaints to Rupert about Giles being boring and lacking ambition actually proved that her motivations for the affair were based more on shallow dissatisfactions than a genuine marital crisis. Most humiliating for Imogen was the public revelation of details about her conspiracy with Rupert to manipulate art prices. Email records showed she was fully informed and actively involved, not an innocent victim misled by Rupert. Several prominent art world figures testified as witnesses, confirming how these operations distorted the market and deceived collectors. In the 10th week of litigation, Rupert's lawyer suddenly contacted the prosecution, indicating his client was willing to provide more information in exchange for a reduced sentence. This move shocked Imogen. Rupert was not only not standing by her side, but preparing to sell her out to save himself. What did he say? Imogen almost hysterically questioned her lawyer. According to my sources, Rupert claims the entire plan was mainly your idea, and he just provided the client network, the lawyer uncomfortably replied. He has also provided more emails and recordings, claiming you repeatedly urged him to speed up operations. Imogen slumped in her chair, incredulous. That's a lie. The entire plan was designed by him. I'm afraid it's too late to say this now, Mrs. Imogen. We need to consider the possibility of a plea bargain. Meanwhile, Giles had already begun looking for a new residence in Portugal. He selected a cliff villa with a terrace overlooking the magnificent view of the Atlantic. The local real estate agent, Sophia, after showing him the property, invited him for a drink at a nearby cafe. It's a new beginning, Mr. Giles, Sophia said kindly, noticing the fatigue in his eyes. Many British people come to the Algarve seeking peace and sunshine. Giles smiled as he sipped his coffee. Peace is what I need most right now. You'll like it here. People respect privacy. The pace of life is slower. Perfect for starting over. I'm not looking for a new relationship, if that's what you're implying, Giles said directly. Sophia laughed. No, I'm just speaking as a real estate agent. However, There are many activities suitable for solitary individuals here. Hiking clubs, reading groups, even surfing lessons, regardless of age. The mention of surfing made Giles chuckle softly. I'm already 58. I'm afraid surfing isn't for me. Nonsense. I have 65-year-old clients who surf every week. Age is just a number, isn't it? This phrase made Giles ponder. Age indeed was just a number, like a bank account balance or property valuation. What really mattered was how you viewed these numbers, how you gave them meaning. Imogen stood in the center of her empty gallery, the walls bare except for nail marks as testament to past prosperity. Since the divorce case and tax investigation became public, exhibitions had been canceled, artists had withdrawn their works, and investors had terminated cooperation. Her professional reputation, carefully built over nearly 20 years, had crumbled in just a few weeks. The phone's ring broke the silence. Imogen glanced at the caller ID. It was her lawyer. She took a deep breath and answered. The situation doesn't look good, Imogen, the lawyer said bluntly. The tax office has sufficient evidence to file charges against you and Rupert. Considering the conclusive evidence, I recommend you consider a plea deal. Plead guilty. Imogen's voice was almost a whisper. That's impossible. There must be other options. Unless you're willing to let Rupert take all the responsibility. But based on the evidence I've seen, your involvement level is not low. Rupert has already started cooperating with prosecutors, providing evidence against you. Imogen bit her lip. Of course, she didn't want to go to prison, but betraying Rupert? Although now it seemed that his plan had led her into this nightmare, and he hadn't hesitated to sell her out. Give me some time to think, she finally said. After hanging up, Imogen walked to the window, looking at London's busy streets. She had once loved this city's vitality and endless possibilities, but now it only made her feel suffocated and lonely. She thought of Giles, who always found peace and certainty in numbers. Perhaps that was what she never understood. Life isn't about appearances and excitement, but about authenticity and stability. But this realization came too late. Meanwhile, Giles was at a cliff villa on Portugal's Algarve coast, gazing at the endless blue of the Atlantic. The divorce proceedings had gone more smoothly than expected. British law stipulates that in cases of proven infidelity and financial misconduct, property division usually favors the wrong party. Giles retained most of the joint property, including the London house, though he decided to sell it, cutting all ties with the past. He didn't regret his decision. 30 years of marriage had turned out to be a pretense. He reflected on Imogen's betrayal, not just physically, but a betrayal of their shared values and future. She had chosen excitement and greed over loyalty and honesty. Giles' phone rang. It was his London lawyer, Fiona. There's news, Giles. Fiona's voice came through the phone. Rupert has been formally charged with tax fraud and market manipulation. The tax office has also filed conspiracy charges against Imogen. Giles listened quietly, without interrupting. According to my sources, Rupert has already reached a plea agreement, providing detailed evidence of Imogen's deep involvement in exchange for a reduced sentence. Their trust didn't last long, did it? Giles commented calmly. Indeed not. Imogen's lawyer is also seeking a plea deal, but her options are limited. The evidence is extremely unfavorable to her. Will she go to prison? Giles asked, with no compassion in his voice, just a calm inquiry. Most likely, though it might be a shorter term, plus community service and substantial fines. Giles nodded, though Fiona couldn't see this gesture. Please continue to monitor the situation and let me know of any developments. After hanging up, Giles walked to the terrace, letting the sea breeze caress his face. He was no longer the silent husband, allowing his wife's contempt and betrayal to leave him unmoved. Now he had found his voice, his strength, although the price had been losing the companion he thought would be with him for life. Is everything all right, Mr. Giles? Sophia, the real estate agent, who happened to be visiting, saw him contemplative on the terrace. Very well, thank you, Giles replied, turning to face her. I think I'm ready to sign the contract. This will be my new home. Sophia nodded with a smile. You've made a wise decision. The Algarve is the perfect place to start a new life. Not starting a new life, Giles corrected, but continuing my life, this time on my own terms. Back in London, a press conference was being held at the tax office headquarters. Officials announced formal charges against Rupert and Imogen, emphasizing this was an important case in combating fraud in the art market. Reporters rushed to ask questions, flashes constantly blinking. According to reports, the entire scheme involves several well-known auction houses and galleries. Is that correct? A reporter asked. The tax office spokesperson cautiously replied, "The investigation is ongoing and might implicate more related parties. We encourage anyone with information to contact us." Rupert's lawyer tried to downplay his role, emphasizing his cooperative attitude, but the prosecution noted that, regardless, he was a key planner of the scheme and would face severe punishment. Meanwhile, Imogen sat alone in her apartment, watching that press conference on television. Her name and photo were publicly displayed, the carefully maintained social image now completely shattered. Her phone kept ringing, friends, colleagues, even family seeking explanations. But she didn't respond to anyone. What could she say? She had betrayed her husband, participated in fraud, and now would pay the price. "It's not fair," she murmured to the empty room. Rupert should bear more responsibility. He planned everything. But deep down, she knew how hollow this justification was. At every step, she had been a conscious participant, driven by greed and vanity, abandoning her moral principles. In court, Imogen tried to maintain dignity, though the media portrayed her as a greedy woman who had betrayed her husband. Her lawyer secured a plea deal, 18 months probation, plus 500 hours of community service and £1 million in fines. This meant she could avoid prison, but her financial situation would plummet and her social status would vanish. As she left the court, reporters swarmed around her. "Mrs. Imogen, do you regret it?" a reporter asked loudly. Imogen stopped and looked at the camera. She could have shown remorse, sought public sympathy, but pride prevented her. "The only thing I regret is trusting the wrong person," she replied coldly, then walked towards the waiting taxi. Behind prison walls, Rupert began serving his 4-year sentence. Despite providing evidence against Imogen, his own role was too central to escape severe punishment. His luxurious lifestyle and social charm were useless here, replaced by monotonous routines and Spartan surroundings. "You'll adapt, Rupert," a prison guard said indifferently, leading him to his cell. "Everyone eventually adapts." Rupert looked around, unable to believe this was his new reality. "I don't belong here," he said quietly. "Everyone says that," the guard shrugged. "But the fact is, your actions brought you here." After the legal judgment, Imogen faced a harsh economic reality. Enormous fines and legal fees depleted her savings. The gallery had closed, and no one wanted to hire an art manager with a fraud record. To make a living, she was forced to sell most of her luxury items, move to a small apartment, and find work coordinating art projects at a local community center. This job was part of her community service during probation, but ironically, it gave her an opportunity to reconsider the essence of art. No longer pursuing profit and fame, but focusing on how art affects ordinary people's lives. However, this transformation didn't stem from genuine repentance, but forced adaptation. Deep inside, Imogen still yearned for the status and luxury she had lost. One rainy afternoon at the community center, as Imogen guided a group of young people in creating a mural, a colleague commented, "You're really good at this, Imogen. These kids really like you." Imogen smiled weakly. "Thank you," she replied, thinking of the high-end gallery openings and champagne dinners of the past. This disparity constantly reminded her of everything she had lost. Whenever she walked past the upscale galleries in Chelsea, seeing the artworks and people that were once part of her world, her pain doubled. Sometimes, she would encounter former friends or clients on the street, who either pretended not to see her or quickly nodded before hurrying away. Social media became another form of torture, her former circle continuing the life she no longer belonged to, posting photos of parties and art events. Meanwhile, Giles' new life in Portugal was taking root. He purchased that cliff villa and began renovating and decorating it, making it truly his home. He joined a local reading club, started learning Portuguese, and even, encouraged by Sophia, enrolled in beginner surfing lessons. "You were right," Giles told Sophia after his first surfing lesson, completely soaked. "Age is just a number." Sophia smiled, handing him a towel. "I told you so. You look much younger than when you first arrived, Giles." It was true. Away from that painful marriage, Giles felt a lightness and vitality he hadn't experienced in a long time. He began exploring interests that he had suppressed due to Imogen's disdain: photography, hiking, even amateur astronomy. He set up a telescope on his terrace and at night observed the stars, feeling the vastness of the universe and the smallness of human relationships. One day, as Giles was enjoying breakfast at a seaside cafe, he received a letter from London. The handwriting on the envelope was Imogen's. He stared at it for a long time, considering whether to open it. Finally, curiosity overcame hesitation. In the letter, Imogen wrote about how much she regretted her choices, how she had come to understand Giles' value, and hoped to be forgiven someday. "I think about our marriage every day and how I destroyed it," she wrote. "I know asking for your forgiveness might be too much, but I want you to know I truly regret hurting you." Giles finished reading the letter, feeling no impulse for compassion or forgiveness. These words came too late, and he doubted their sincerity. Was Imogen truly sorry for hurting him, or just sorry for losing her comfortable life and social status? He folded the letter, walked to the beach. The waves rose up the sand and retreated to the sea. Giles tore the letter into pieces, letting them scatter in the wind. He didn't need ghosts from the past disturbing his new life. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, some wounds too severe to heal. Back at the cafe, he sent a brief message to Fiona. "If Imogen contacts again, tell her not to try. I've moved on." Fiona quickly replied, "Understood. Are you all right?" "Better than ever," Giles answered, and it was true. In London, Imogen sat by the window of her small apartment, waiting for a response that would never come. As time passed, she began to realize that Giles had completely cut off contact with her. No forgiveness, no possibility of reconciliation, only the consequences she had to face. Her community service continued, but her bitterness and resentment grew with each day. She told herself that it was all Rupert's fault, that he had seduced her onto the wrong path. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her own greed and desire for more had led to her downfall. After 2 years in prison, Rupert wrote a letter to Imogen, claiming he had seen his mistakes and hoped for her forgiveness. Imogen scornfully threw the letter in the trash. She knew Rupert too well, knew this was just another attempt at manipulation. Perhaps he was already planning his next scam after prison, looking for another fool willing to believe his lies. On some lonely nights, when the feeling of solitude was particularly strong, Imogen would think of Giles. Not missing him, but missing the security and stability he provided. Qualities she had once considered dull, but now seemed so precious. Yet she had never truly loved him, only enjoyed the life he provided. This self-awareness didn't bring liberation, but deepened her pain. 3 years passed, and Giles' life had taken root in Portugal. His Portuguese had improved considerably. He had established genuine friendships in the local community, and even began providing remote consulting for an international accounting firm, helping identify potential fraud in the art market. His experience made him an expert in this field, and the work was light, just enough to keep his mind active. One day, at a local art festival, he met Helena, a retired professor from the United States. She had a genuine love for art, not viewing it as a symbol of social status. They chatted the entire afternoon, discussing topics from Impressionism to modern art, and Giles found that for the first time, he could truly share his insights on art with someone, without being belittled or dismissed. "There's an interesting exhibition next Tuesday," Helena said as they parted. "If you're interested?" Giles hesitated for a moment. Since Imogen, he had avoided any potential romantic relationships. But Helena's invitation seemed purely out of shared interest in art. "Of course," he replied. "I'd be delighted." This wasn't the beginning of a romance, but the blossoming of a friendship. Giles had learned to value genuine connections, not social expectations or superficial appearances. If anything developed, it would be built on mutual respect and honesty, something he never truly had in his marriage with Imogen. In London, Imogen's community service period had ended, but her life hadn't improved. The art world had closed its doors to her, and she could only find work in a small craft shop. This was far from her former ambitions, but at least it paid the rent. Sometimes, she would see photos of Giles on social media, shared by friends of friends. Beautiful views of the Portuguese coast with Giles occasionally in the background, looking peaceful and content. These images were like salt on a wound, reminding her of losing not just her marriage, but her dignity and future. Rupert finally completed his sentence and, upon release, tried to return to the art world, but found himself equally excluded. His name had become synonymous with fraud and dishonesty. No gallery wanted to work with him. No collector trusted his advice. Eventually, he moved to a small town in southern Spain where nobody knew his past and began running a small tourist souvenir shop, peddling cheap replicas to uninformed tourists. The greatest irony for the once high-flying art broker. Once, he tried to contact Imogen, proposing to restart our cooperation, but her response was simple and direct. Get lost, Rupert. We've already ruined each other's lives. There's nothing more to say. 5 years later, on a winter day, Imogen happened to see a news item on London streets. An important art exhibition would be held in Faro, Portugal, and the advisory team included Giles' name. She stared at that name, feeling a pang. Giles had rebuilt his life, even finding a respected position in the art field, a field that was once her domain, from which she was now permanently excluded. This is the ultimate price of betrayal, not just losing others' trust, but also losing one's sense of self-worth and future possibilities. Imogen and Rupert chose short-sighted satisfaction and greed, and now only reaped loneliness and regret. Giles, on the other hand, chose honesty and self-respect. Though the process was painful, he ultimately found true freedom and peace. He didn't tolerate betrayal, didn't accept false apologies, but completely cut ties with the past, creating a life entirely his own. In the morning sunlight of the Algarve, Giles began a new day, without resentment, only determination for the future. He had settled accounts with the past, and now, it was time to fully embrace his new life. He looked at the vast blue of the Atlantic, contemplating life's turns. 30 years of marriage had ended in betrayal, but he hadn't let that define him. Instead, he discovered a more authentic self, not the Giles attached to Imogen's social ambitions, but a confident, independent Giles, able to live on his own terms. "Good morning, ocean," he said softly to the waves. "Today will be a beautiful day." Indeed it would be, because ultimately, life isn't about what you've lost, but about how you rebuild. Not about how others betray you, but about how you maintain your dignity. Not about past pain, but about the courage to choose your future. This was the most important lesson Giles learned, one that Imogen and Rupert would never understand. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating content. See you in the next story.